more impact on the decision makers in terms of their respect for you and engagement with you, so that you can both create your own actions and invite people to them to meet with you, and sometimes you can participate in actions that are, maybe run by your city or town or school committee, where they may be holding a hearing or something like that you could organize people to go to. And then there's always a need to evaluate after every meeting, not every meeting, to question people and have people go around and say what works, what worked and didn't work, on that meeting. So let's move to the next slide. Slide number 6.
Yes.
About involving more parents in your organization. Slide number 6.
Mm-hmm.
Are we on that?
Yes.
Okay. It's not on my computer, but that's okay. There are a lot of different ways to do outreach, and some of you have started this and have built your organization, and others have done other, are going to do this. One of the things I left off that I wanted to mention, and maybe we can send this out, a good way to start before you even do any outreach is to, once the people you have in the room who are your parents and other residents and part of your organization, we do an exercise we call mapping relationships, where we ask them to really list their own relationships. Because if you ask people, who can you get involved, sometimes people are scratching their head and they mention a few names, but they're not quite sure where to begin. So we often do this exercise we call mapping relationships, and we just have on a piece of paper parents, friends, relatives, neighbors, coworkers, members of a congregation you belong to if you do, and members of organizations if you belong to other organizations. And we just ask people, if you were to, about the campaign or the issues that we're working on, who among these categories of people might you want to approach? And some of them might be people who could join an actual committee like you're on, and some of them might be people who you could count on to turn out once a year for some major event. But if you have people sit down and map those relationships, again, parents, friends, relatives, neighbors, coworkers, church members, organization members, they'll start to list, everyone will start to list a lot more people because they have a life and a relationships, and then it can make outreach less intimidating, and they can even start with their own relationships of people they think might be interested in the work of your organization. So that's trying to do what I would call the relational relationships that people have. The other things I mentioned there, obviously the meeting with the principals and teachers in the schools in your area, they could, if you meet with them in a small group or one-on-one, they could start to identify parents that they think have shown interest based on how they, have come forward about their own child's education or how they may have participated in school events. So that's a way to get names, and then you can use the credential of I got your name from so-and-so. Obviously, some schools may have PTOs that may be places to draw on, and some PTOs are very active and vital, and some may only be focusing on something like fundraising or something like that, so you want to give them respect and involve them, but not necessarily be confined only to that PTO. Another technique we've used in organizing is sometimes to knowing when a school starts and ends. There are a certain number of parents who are walking their kids to school and picking them up, and there's a piece of time when they're there, and that can be a time to actually, as a volunteer or an organizer, to strike up a conversation with parents there about what you're doing as an organization and your concerns. So that would be another thing you can do. I've lost the computer hookup, so if you could give me like a 2-3-minute warning and then a 1-minute warning when my time is up, if I can hear that over the phone.
Sure.
So those could be ways to do outreach. There may be other kinds of ways parents are organized, like Head Start meeting sometimes has parents meetings. Catholic churches have what are called CCD for kids who are in public school, but sometimes they gather the parents, or the priest might be willing to work with you on gathering the parents. so that you can talk to them as an organized parents, and I'm sure you could come up with a number of other ways. One way we've done something that's in the next slide, slide number 7, and if you could move to that. One way, which is some ways sometimes to combine the school agenda with the organizing agenda of your group, is to try to have a special event go further. Many schools have open houses or student performances or things like that. But one example of how you can draw on that to build your organization is if there is some special event. One of our schools did something where the students prepared work and they left it on their desk, and then they encouraged their parents to come, and they even had competitions between classes that the class that has the most parents come gets a pizza party as a way to encourage parents to come because of that, and because their kid's asking them, and because the kid says, you're going to be able to see what I do. And then when the parents come, you can either, when they're gathered in one place to start, you could, if you could work that out with the principal, you could, in a sense, divide people up into small group meetings where they could introduce themselves and talk about the community and education concerns that they're concerned about, and you can get people talking and get their names and addresses and have them fill out interest cards. And so it's like running a small group meeting or a house meeting amongst the parents. You'd have to have people prepared to be facilitators, but you could do that in that way, or you could do it within when parents go to their individual classrooms. But that may be a way to, in a sense, build on some kinds of events that schools already do, but sort of add a component to it with this small group meeting that people can actually talk about what they're concerned about in their education of the kids, or other community events or other larger education events that affect them, as well as what your organization wants to get to parents. So that could be another way to connect to a school event that might be happening or could be changed to allow this. So the slide number 8 is about what we call one-to-one relational meetings, and maybe I know the people from Burlington Winooski have done a lot, so you might be able to share in the question part, some of your experiences of that. But these are generally what's called 30-minute meetings where you sit down with someone one-on-one and share your story, do some breaking the ice by just saying, I want to get to know you, and talk some about the school and share your story about how you came to live where you are, and what you do, and what and how many kids you have, and ask the same of them. And then you're really asking them a key question about what are they most concerned about related to their child's education. And you could also, depending on your organization, you may want to ask about other community issues that they're concerned about. But don't just take a survey. You want to, whenever people answer, you want to say, why is that important to you? And you want to ask a third question. Is there a story you can tell me about why this is important to you? How has it affected your child or people you feel about? So it's really 3 connected stories. What's your concern? Why is that important to you? And can you tell me a story about how it affects you and your children, or your family and people you care about? And then you can close with some type of proposition, based on their interest that you've learned. You've said you're concerned about such and such. We're working on that, or we're looking at working on things like that. Would you consider coming to a meeting where people like you who have these concerns are going to be meeting and trying to do something about them? That way you're not just organizing, in a sense, organizing to come to your thing. You're organizing them to come to something based on what they said they were interested in. There's a different kind of way to do it. So that's what happens in a one-on-one relational meeting. Some of you have done that, and there can be more follow-up through this process for those groups who've done less of this, about how to do this and how to do training on that. Move to slide 9. Hello? Yep. There's no shortage of issues, but there is a shortage of having enough people involved. So you really need to focus on involving, more parents and residents, and then listening to their stories, and out of the stories of the concerns that they raise to you, you'll have a set of problems and want to do research on them, on what could we do about these problems, and there's a whole process to do that, which we didn't write up in this thing, or I didn't write up, but it involves looking at who's doing what about those issues now, what are the best practices within your community or within other communities in your state or area, finding out who's responsible for the decision. That can help you make a strategy plan, but you can imagine the kinds of issues, and you've been working on them, that relate to things that are going on in your school that would improve your child's performance and relationships. There are sometimes community issues, like one of our groups in Lynn, Massachusetts, one of the school groups addressed the issue of installing a pedestrian light in a school crossing, and another case getting one fixed as a local issue around safety. There could be other kinds of safety issues related to other things that happen as kids go home and go back that you could work on. There always are overall funding issues in terms of decisions of your town or city school committee and other executives, and sometimes state decisions that affect funding and opportunities for your schools that you could work on, and other kinds of initiatives. So there's no shortage of issues that can come out of it, but once these problems come up from the listening, you do have to have a disciplined sort of what we call research and strategy effort to look at these questions of, like I said, what's being done about it, what are best practices elsewhere, who is responsible, what could we actually ask for, if it costs something, is that feasible, and that leads to coming up with a specific proposal of what you want to do and who is responsible, and then coming up with some tactics of how we're going to engage the decision maker, such as having a meeting with them and getting a lot of people to come to the meeting. And then moving to slide 10, that's just a sample of an organizational meeting agenda that obviously has to be adjusted and made specific to where you are. And sometimes your meetings are more going to be focused on how we're doing our outreach and what we're hearing, and then some meetings will have reports on research you've done on potential issues, and number 4, and some meetings will have more about developing your strategy in number 5 and 6. So this isn't a generic agenda, but these are kinds of things that can be on agendas, and then obviously you can make them more specific to the situation. Number 7, it's implied, but you should always have an evaluation as the last part of the meeting, where you just have a quick go around and ask people what worked, where was their spirit in this meeting, why, and what could we have done differently or better to make this meeting better the next time. So always try to do that, because that'll help you make your meetings better. The one other thing about meetings that a lot of you have probably been in meetings where a smaller number of people speak more, and that's a problem because some people are more confident to speak and others are less confident to speak, but unless you get everyone talking, you don't have a sense of really what people want to do as well as the talents of everyone. So sometimes there may be points on the agenda where you really want more input, and there are 2 techniques sometimes we encourage. The chair of the meeting could actually ask the people who haven't spoken that we'd like to hear from everyone, and just go around and ask them by name. Marilyn, this is the question. Marilyn, what do you think? Jane, what do you think? Joe, what do you think? Another technique is just to say, well, this is a really important question. We want everyone to speak on this, so we're just going to go around and give everyone a chance. You can't do that on everything, but sometimes you want to do those techniques to make sure everybody gets their voice into it, because otherwise it could be a few more self-confident people who speak most of the time, and that just doesn't give you all you could get out of a meeting. So those are some things about organizing in meetings. And then how much time is left?
Just about 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. Let me, as I said, just to summarize, that when you're thinking about outreach to get more parents involved in your group and more residents involved in the group, start with that mapping exercise. And if it's helpful, I can write that up and get it to the Nellie Mae Annenberg people and get that out to you. But it's very simple. It's again, who are the people sit at a meeting and they list who are the parents, friends, relatives, neighbors, coworkers, church members, organizational members that they know, and sort of thinking about it two ways. Who would be people who might get involved in this kind of effort we're doing here, and who are people who, if we had one big important meeting a year, who might come if I asked them to because of its importance to me and the community. So that's the first kind of outreach that people should do, is really starting with their own relationships, and then you can try these other kinds of things as well as other things you've thought about related to principals and teachers and ways parents are organized and so forth and so on. And how do you, a number of you having events in schools, how do you adapt them to have a specific section that could listen to parents' concerns in a large group, but better if you can do that in small groups. And then there is a process once people identify problems to do that, what I call research to strategy, that's mentioned there, and so forth. So probably I'll stop now, and then obviously through Nellie Mae and Annenberg and the next presentation from Kamel, you'll learn more, and then obviously as you go along, hopefully there'll be ways to support your specific questions when you get into how are we going to develop our strategy, how are we going to do one-to-one training, and so forth. But I'll stop there. This can be very powerful. One of our groups in New Bedford, faced with 40% of the entering ninth graders dropping out, went through this whole process of listening to people's concerns and hearing those stories, and a lot of stories about low expectations from some decision makers. And they visited to find best practices in other cities, and came up with something that was variously called small autonomous schools or pilot schools. And they organized 600 people to come to a meeting to get commitments from their mayor and school committee. Then they followed through on the process to implement that, and now there's a request for proposals that's out to create several of these new autonomous schools. And these are schools where the principals, teachers, and parents get to get autonomy on how to use the budget and what to use it for, and are free from a lot of the rules that can restrict and centralize decision making. So that's just cite an example of what you can do through organizing as one of many examples. So let me stop there, and thank you for listening.
Great. Thanks a lot, Lou. We will, and here's some contact information for Lou, but we'll have a chance to interact after Kamel's presentation is done. So thank you very much. We're going to switch over now to Kamel, who will be talking about her experience in doing this work. Pretty young organization, Teach Our Children and Youth Unleashed in New Haven, Connecticut. She actually is very similar to a lot of you on the phone in terms of the community work right now, in that she's a single-staffed organization, a single-person organization in terms of paid staff. And so definitely I think we'll be able to speak directly to a lot of the challenges that everyone is facing, and then just a lot of the questions that you all have about getting started. So I'm going to pass the control over to you, Kamel, and you should be able to scroll through your slides.
Great. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to start to tell a little bit about myself. I'm actually a fairly new organizer as well. The organization has been around since 2006, and our youth organization, Youth Unleashed, has been around since about 2009. I've been organizing since about 2008 when I came in to Teach Our Children, and before that I would have called myself more of an activist. The main difference for me being the focus or lack of focus on membership and leadership development, and that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about right now. So Teach Our Children and Youth Unleashed were two organizations that came together in 2010. In 2000, Teach Our Children was founded by two New Haven public school parents and a community organizer who felt a great sense of frustration with the lack of parent involvement and the persistently failing school system, and decided to form this organization to make a real change. In 2009, these are just some of our largest victories, the largest changes that our group has made. But in 2009, Teach Our Children had made a huge impact on New Haven Public Schools bullying and discipline policies, calling for a revision to those policies and making sure that the discipline policies and the bullying policy were really focused on discipline that would keep students in school as much as possible and avoid exclusionary discipline that finds some students out on the streets and getting into more trouble. In 2010, we're particularly proud of this. We had a group of Spanish-speaking parents come together, and those parents really made huge changes. It took a couple of years, but they made huge changes around what translation and interpretation services were available to parents with a limited capacity for speaking English. Youth Unleashed was founded in 2009 by a group of New Haven public school students at a local church. And after they had done a series of open mic nights and had started to touch on a few issues, but had never really been able to take off on an issue, partly because of the part-time nature of their organizer, decided to join Teach Our Children in an effort to take their work to the next level. And in 2011, we established our first Youth Unleashed chapter at Hill House High School, made some significant improvements around sanitation at that school, and eventually won more than $8,000 in additional funds for textbooks at Hill House. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we did that. So that's just a little background on who we are. The organizational structure of Teach Our Children and Youth Unleashed as one organization is sort of explained in this little graph here. And I just want to preface this by saying your organization, is going to have a particular structure that works best for you. So this might be something, if you're thinking about structure, this might be something to look at. But I do encourage people to really think about what's going to work for you. This has been what works for us, but there's a lot of changes that you might make for your own organization. So starting at the top with parent and student members who come into the organization through various forms of outreach that I'll talk about a little bit more. They develop into parent and student leaders through, experience and through training. And the parent and student members as well, and particularly dues-paying members, which is a structure we're just moving into, they nominate and elect the board of directors. And then parent and student leaders might run for the board of directors and be elected onto the board of directors. So our board of directors is entirely made up of New Haven Public School parents and students. I should say New Haven parents and students, because we do have some charter school parents as well. So our board of directors hires and evaluates the director. That's my position. And then the director hires and supervises staff. And we made a particular decision there about making the director the key person in the hiring and, if necessary, firing of staff, just for clear lines of accountability. But I do want to say that the board of directors is very involved in that hiring process for all staff, and that it's really important to us that relationship between an organizer and leaders and board of directors is really well evaluated before somebody is hired. And then the staff and the director support, train, and facilitate the work of parent and student members in a partnership with parent and student leaders. So next, I want to talk a little bit about building a base and recruiting members and training leaders. And the main philosophy that we look at is, the iron rule. You never do for others what they can do for themselves. And, we often have new organizers come in and say, well, what should I do and what should the leaders do? How do I know where I'm overstepping my bounds? And the way I've thought about it is that if it's something where I am taking a leadership opportunity away from somebody, I want to do my best to find somebody to do that with me or to do it on their own, depending on where they are at in their development. But if it's something like making copies that's maybe not so much of a leadership development activity, that's something I'll probably do as an organizer. So thinking about, you know, what can somebody learn from doing this, and what can they contribute as a community member, as a parent, or as a student in being a part of this? What will be lost if they're not here? So the path to leadership that I really think about when we have new members coming in is that, you know, the new members join, and included in this is, you know, some of what Lou talked about with the one-on-one meetings, and those are really important, and they can really change the relationship that you have with a new person coming in, and encourage them to come to meetings and participate and be open about what kind of leadership they want to take on. So new members join, you might have one-on-ones in there. Then, you know, the goal is getting to that next step and having the new members meet each other and, you know, start to talk about issues, start to talk about, you know, where do they want to go and what do they want to do. And then through that training and experience process, through identifying issues, identifying, you know, who's responsible for an issue, what exactly are our list of demands, what is it that we want here, and what's the strategy that we're going to put in place to get what we need and what we want for our schools. That's a training process through experience. And then we also have targeted trainings that, you know, on topics like base building or negotiation, some of which come right before. Say we're about to negotiate with somebody in the school district, we'll have a negotiation training. But right now we're really trying to move towards having a regular biannual training that new members can come to, and that's also a way of sort of building relationships within the group. So outreach and turnout, Lou talked about this quite a bit. I don't want to put too much more time into it because what he said there was really great. One thing I would add is to identify your base, and I wasn't so sure where all of the groups were thinking about going, but you know, if you want to work with parents, if that's a priority to you, if you feel like youth are a necessity, then there are sort of different places to find different people, and where we go to connect with youth and our outreach strategies with youth are very different from our outreach strategies with parents. And I'll talk about this a little bit more too in a story I'm going to tell, but the youth I find are more into the word of mouth and inviting friends, and that seems to be the best way to get youth involved. That also works really well for parents. But I've found that it's easier to kind of meet parents out, you know, at the school bus drop-offs or at school dismissals, knocking on doors in the community, going to community spaces like parks and libraries. We've also conducted presentations for different agencies, organizations. Congregations are great if churches are open to you coming in to, you know, men's groups or women's group and meeting some of the parents there, and just talking about the work that you do. And one thing I'd add there is, you know, with everything that we do, and, you know, we can even look back to the sort of the chart that I had, that in almost every piece of this, it's about parents and students really being engaged. So if we're going to be doing outreach, it's going to be parents and students out with us talking to their peers. If I do a presentation, that presentation would be led by the parents and the youth, which creates an interesting dynamic where people can see themselves in the organization rather than, you know, seeing a director and organizer. And hosting public events is something that we're doing more of. We just had a scholarship fair. That was something our youth really wanted to do. They organized it, and a lot of young people came to it, and we had a couple people join out of it. Having, you know, maybe parenting group meetings, you know, where parents might want to come together and talk about some of the challenges of having children of different ages. So, you know, parents might come to that for the parenting advice, and they might stay because, hey, I have an issue that you guys are working on, and I'm really excited about being a part of this group. So, and then bringing members together, getting people into those meetings. I wanted to talk a little bit about turnout. Something that is really important to us and with our staff is understanding what we call the numbers game. If you want to get 20 people to a meeting, you're going to need to call, let me think about this. You're going to need to call 80 people by our numbers game. Because by the game, if you call 80 people and half of those people say yes, they're going to come, you know, based on their availability, then half of those 40 people who say that they're going to come are actually going to show up. So being sure that if you want to get 20 people to actually show up, that you're aware of, with new members, how, you know, things change and how their commitment might not totally yet. If you're doing the one-on-ones, you can really help get people to meet their commitment when they say they're going to come and to show up. But we always sort of play that numbers game to make sure that we're inviting enough people to get the numbers that we really want for a meeting. And then follow up, follow up, follow up. Invite people, make sure that they get a reminder call at a time that works for them. And then after a meeting, whether somebody comes or doesn't show up, we like to call them and check in and say, you know, so what did you think of that meeting, and have an additional conversation, follow up about the next meeting, or about something maybe that they took on, a leadership role during the meeting that they did come to. And if they didn't come, just letting them know that they were missed. I think about a leader who was really one of the most involved leaders in our organization, who told me, I asked him why he joined. And I was shocked by his answer. He said, because I wouldn't stop calling him. and he became so engaged in the organization. It was really one of our strongest leaders. So I do want to talk next about who makes change. I'm aware of my time here. A story of leadership development. I want to tell this as quickly as I can. This is a story of a young leader named Giselle, who at the time was 16 years old and a New Haven Public School junior. Giselle and her fellow students were concerned about unsanitary bathrooms at their school. And when we talk about what makes a good issue, one of the things that we think about is the issue widely felt, is it urgently felt, and is it deeply felt? And in having this initial conversation about the bathrooms and seeing the body language of the students, how their voices changed, how angry and frustrated they were about the situation, and how all of them shared really similar perspective on the issue, it was clear that this was a really good issue for us to start with. So Giselle eagerly took on leadership roles. She participated in drafting a list of solutions to the issue and recruiting more of her classmates to participate in the campaign. She participated in trainings on negotiation and a meeting between Youth Unleashed and their principal, where they secured an agreement to clean up the school. Now, Giselle really got a sense of her ability and the group's ability to make change that day. The next day, when the soap dispensers were stocked with soap, all the broken toilets in the building were fixed, and basically almost everything on their list had been handled within a month of that meeting. The group really felt energized. So we took on an issue that some people might say is a larger issue about the school budget. And this picture here is a picture of Giselle and New Haven's Mayor John DeStefano, who Giselle had a couple of run-ins with Mayor DeStefano that week, first inviting him to the meeting, which he was resistant to attending. And then when he came to the meeting, the group really challenged him on some specific issues around the school budget. And this meeting resulted in a private meeting between the student leaders of Youth Unleashed, some of our parent leaders as well, Mayor DeStefano, and Dr. Mayo, the superintendent. And out of that, the school that Giselle and most of her student leaders go to, Hill House, received $8,000 in additional funding for textbooks. Now, the group was really excited about that, but it wasn't enough. So, you know, we continue working on that issue now. Let me just get here. Okay. Continuing, training and experience, you know, how do we develop leaders and strong leaders who want to really make change in the community? And again, I want to say, remember the iron rule. Always bring a leader when in doubt. If you have a site visit with a funder, I find that funders really love meeting our leaders too. So always bring a leader with me for that. Speaking with the press, that should be a leader doing that case. And, you know, having meetings with school representatives, attending meetings about school change, which is going on in our community, always bringing a leader with you, and always making sure that those leaders are really thoroughly prepared beforehand. I think it can be very frustrating for people to be marched into a situation that they didn't feel that they were prepared for, and that can cause you to lose people. And then, just like Lou said, debriefing afterwards, evaluating, how did that go? How did we do? And that can be an opportunity to get ongoing feedback from your leaders about, well, you know, I felt like maybe I could do better here, well, maybe we can work on that. Maybe you can do more practice here. Maybe you can participate in such and such a training. And engage leaders in their own development. Get to know them, doing one-on-ones with them at the membership stage, making a leadership development plan together about what is it that they really want to improve. Pair up with experienced leaders with newer leaders. That's been something that has really helped out, where some leaders don't feel as confident doing certain things, pairing them up with more experienced leaders. And then training, you know, utilizing the gifts of your more experienced leaders to help lead trainings and organize trainings with you. That's sort of a next level of training for them. And then making trainings interactive and asking questions of the group about, you know, sort of, you know, what's going on in the training and what is it that they want to work on. And then I want to talk just a little bit, if I have time, about power and working with district and city leaders from a position of strength. This is a quote from Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. To know power and not fear it is essential to its constructive use and control. And this is where this kind of presentation is challenging, because I'm not able to get feedback from the group as much. But if you look inside the groups that you work with, or even ask yourself, do I want power? Is that something that you know, people feel comfortable admitting? So that's just something to think about. And then some of the other stuff I talk about here is, you know, what happens when leaders know what they want and need and aren't afraid to demand it. Some of the organizations that you're working with maybe haven't had parents and students taking the lead as much, so what's going to change there in how a school district might receive you? And does operating from a position of strength necessarily mean conflict? I wish I had more time to get into this, but we've definitely seen that sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So, so thinking about how you're being. So I do want to talk more about capacity, challenges, doing a lot with very little. This is something that I actually do want to say. We actually have 2 staff members. We have 1 full-time and 1 part-time. And setting priorities has been really important to us, you know, knowing, okay, so what is it that we absolutely need to get done versus what is it that we really want to get done, so that we don't overload ourselves. Never going into a situation where the leaders aren't on board. You know, if leaders aren't really excited about doing something, there's not only sometimes no point in doing it, but it's much more challenging as the staff member to do something that the leaders aren't really as much behind. And the pros and cons of volunteer staff, sometimes if it's a funding issue, bringing on more staff, we think, oh, well, let's bring on more volunteers. And I'd say I've had really mixed experiences there. I've had some really great volunteers, especially interns, through programs where it's linked.
Uh-oh. I think we may have lost Kamel's sound.
Annenberg will go into a little bit later. That's an important piece of retaining leaders, you know, making sure that they're getting information on an ongoing basis and that they're motivated. And your leaders will help increase your capacity, the more of them that there are and the more motivated that they are. And so I think I'm going to leave it there. I got a couple messages from Keith here. Do I have time to get into the rest of this, or is it better if I just leave it?
You have maybe 1 more minute if you want to just wrap up quickly.
Okay.
We'll get to
okay. So really quickly, I just want to get into this next point about when powerful people push back, and this is going back to the, you know, what happens when the parents and community members, especially if they maybe are perceived as lower income, maybe less educated, that sometimes people in positions of power will push back in a way that they won't against somebody who's maybe coming with financial backing or a perceived title. One thing that has been so true for us is, you know, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And that's critical, because sometimes it's hard for leaders to see when they're in the thick of it and they're being fought and things are coming out in the media that, you know, are positive, but then there's also things coming out that are negative against them. That has, for us, usually happened right before we've had a huge victory. So it's getting people past that hump and getting people to see that this fighting back is because we have challenged the system that that wasn't ready to be challenged, isn't used to being challenged, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And those relationships can be rebuilt. So winning is only the beginning. So make sure that whatever you win, that you're monitoring it and evaluating it on an ongoing basis. Building a community around it can be really helpful for that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close. Thank you guys all for having me and for listening, and I hope that was helpful.
Great, thank you, Camille. And we definitely.
So I'm going to pass this back to you, right?
Yep, I can do it.
Oh, okay. I think I did it.
So, and we have some questions that have come in. So thank you all. Just to remind folks that if you are this says submit questions to Joanne, but actually it's Tracy. So if you have any questions that have come up for either Lou or Camille, please send them to Tracy, and we'll just start getting into as many as we have the time for. So we did get a few already, and I'll just throw those out. Some are directed at one of the presenters, and some are, I think, fair game for both of you in any case. So the first question that we'll go to, and this is actually true across the sites, I think. So it says, we are focused on organizing parents living in economic hardship. If we work with PTO/school events, we'll often get lots of interest from higher income families who are themselves ready to take a lead. So how do you target specific families? And I think implied in there is, how do you target the families who may not be showing up automatically to the school-based events? So what are other strategies when trying to get some of not the usual players? And I think Lou and Camille have both, I've unmuted both of you, so you should both be able to chime in.
Well, I would say we work with a lot of low-income parents, and what's been important is sometimes having meetings in their neighborhoods. I couldn't say what's going on in your community in terms of parents not being as interested in the PTOs, but I do know a lot of the parents that we work with have felt like PTOs were not as welcoming to them, or were not as interested in hearing about that they were concerned about, and were more interested in fundraising. And I know that varies from PTO to PTO. But having meetings at a local library or a local community center that's close to people's homes. Sometimes it's transportation issues. Sometimes having food and child care. I know a lot of the PTOs where we are don't provide that, and we always do. So it's allowed us to bring in people who have those kinds of challenges. But I think having a meeting in a more neutral space, because it might be that the schools don't feel as welcoming.
I would add, just again, going back to what I said, some of you to map your own relationships first, because you may have some of the targeted parents you want in your relationships. Think about asking teachers individually and the principal about parents to talk to, and even be explicit about it. How do we get people of different income groups? And they may have some sense of who's who on that kind of economic and racial scale of people. And then there may be, like we said, the drop-off, pick-up sometimes is a way to do outreach to parents that may get you more diversity in who you're reaching. And then where people belong, Head Start groups, if there are religious congregations, they belong in the neighborhood, you may approach them as another way to try to find parents within their groups. So it's, a lot of it comes down to the individual community, but doing those kinds of steps could diversify your base, and, we could talk further individually to each group on this.
Great, thank you. And there was a quick, more almost a logistical question in terms of sequencing some of the things that you spoke about earlier, Lou. One question that came in was just about the timing of things, and Camille, I know you do this work too. So how soon after you do one-on-ones would you hold a larger organizing meeting? What can you give a sense of sort of a time frame or a sequence of events in a timeline?
Well, you probably, once your one-to-ones are over, I think the groups doing or the people doing the one-to-ones you want to meet in some ways as soon as you can, but you also need to allow time to go back to people. In some cases, you're calling them back and say, remember I talked to you and you said you were interested in these things and now we're having a meeting. In some cases, you may need to go back to people a second time and sit down one-to-one to reemphasize that proposition of getting them involved, especially the concerns you have about diversity. So you kind of I think, make a group plan. The one-to-ones may happen or small group meetings may happen over, I'm just making it up, 2 months. And then your goal might be we're going to have a meeting, after the one-to-ones end, we're going to have a meeting 3 weeks from that period, but in that first week, we're going to really be getting back to people by phone and by individual meetings, and second individual meetings sometimes. And if you need more time for it, it may be like the first round of one-to-ones during this 2-month period, and then we have 1 month to follow up and get back to people either by phone and or one-to-one the second time where necessary. But we're talking to them about a specific meeting date that we have planned. Maybe it's, say, like the end of month 3. When we're getting back to them, and then there needs to be another round of reminder calls, sort of 2 nights before the actual meeting to remind people about coming and check whether they are coming. So it can vary, but you need a plan like that, the outreach plan, the getting back to people plan, and then the final reminder calls before the meeting you're holding.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's really important to have some kind of follow-up that happens as soon as possible after the one-on-one, because you just don't want that relationship to kind of get stale to where, if you would call that person, would they even remember who you are? So.
Great. Another question that came in, this one was targeted at Kamel concerning the number game rule, and being curious about how you ensure that individuals who can't keep up with the meetings or don't come to meetings keep up with the changes and the discussions and the development, sort of the fast-paced nature of some of the work, perhaps, and what tools that you use to keep information flowing among the participants who might be involved to varying degrees.
Yeah, and that differs for people depending on what level they're involved. So somebody who's really involved but maybe has had to miss a few meetings, I spend a lot of time on the phone, talking to people, calling them up and checking in with them. I call people who I haven't seen in a long time and check in with them about, not just what's going on in the group, but also what's going on for them is important. If I haven't seen somebody in a really long time, I might do another one-on-one with them. But basically, I would say, email it works for some people, and that's a challenge, is that for some people, email doesn't work at all. But that's an easy way to keep people who are really part-time and short-term participants involved, and maybe having a newsletter. We've done that before, but there's capacity issues to creating a newsletter. One thing that we've tried is like a newsy letter, which it's just a letter, more or less, that kind of checks in with people and lets them know what's going on in the group. And it doesn't require a lot of pictures or any pictures at all if you don't want to do that. It's a one-pager that just kind of does an explanation of what's going on in the group, and then just mailing that out to people who maybe aren't as connected with via email. Yeah, keeping people informed is really important, and the capacity issues do make that difficult. So tapping into, your resources, your leaders, can leaders take a handful of members, phone numbers, and call them up to keep them up to date, as well as, the organizer doing that.
And you might do some additional one-to-ones if they're people you thought have potential and would contribute to the diversity of the group you want. You may want to try another one-to-one of someone who attended once or didn't attend, and you still have hope or need for them to be involved. You may still try that in addition to a reminder call.
And you know what I would say also that makes me think about, I had a leader, and I think all of my organizers have had this too, or not a leader, I should say, a potential member who was sort of like my Moby Dick, my great white whale, somebody that I chased and that I really thought, you know, had potential, but who was never able to come to a meeting, and who made several one-on-one appointments with me, and you know, had to break them for various reasons. And so, you know, I've had to learn, and all of our organizers have had to learn over time to, like, let some things go, you know, to take a good assessment. And if you can get people to say, you know, if you can ask, you know, so are you interested, after a certain point, if people are really kind of giving you the runaround, and you can get them to say, no, I'm not really interested, that helps. But I find that oftentimes people won't want to say that. So you want to put the time in to keep up with people, but also, you know, try and set some limits with them about, so how do you want to be informed, you know, so that you don't end up chasing people who aren't really interested.
Mm-hmm. Great, and I think we have time for a couple more quick questions. One that came in directed at Kamel, but again, I think you could both chime in, is could you describe a little more what parent leadership training looks like? I think, and we just had a meeting with our friends in Pittsfield, and, you know, talking about, I think when we say the word training sometimes, that conjures up some images that may or may not be as accurate as what it looks like in practice. So can you talk a little more, can you describe a little more what parent leadership training actually looks like?
Yeah, for us, training is ongoing too. Sometimes we might slip it into a regular meeting, like a quick training exercise. Sometimes we might have like a one-day or, you know, one evening training around a specific issue. For example, when we do negotiations, I'll have a negotiation training that's pretty comprehensive that'll happen before we meet with the target. Where we start, I like to talk about power as part of that negotiation process. It depends on who's in the negotiation too and what kind of experience they have. But I might talk about the difference between power relationships and personal relationships. A lot of times, you know, for example, when we meet with the superintendent, he might come in and really try to make friends while really trying not to do what we're asking him to do. So recognizing the sort of tricks of the trade and being an active participant in a negotiation, knowing what you want, knowing your bottom line. And as part of that process, we also do work on our list of demands to make sure that it's tight, make sure that everything that we want is in there, make sure that there's deadlines. We want X by such and such a date, and making sure that we're asking yes or no questions. And then we do a role play, which we might have a whole additional day for role plays, or not a whole day, but like an additional meeting for role plays, where we spend 2 hours. I've done a lot of, people love my impression of the superintendent. I do my impression of like what I've seen of some of the tricks that they use sometimes, or the mayor, and then I really challenge the group with sometimes really worst case scenarios of what they might be up against. So that way when they come in the meeting, they're ready for the best case scenario, but they're also prepared for the worst. And that's where we've been challenged, and maybe Lou could speak to this a little bit too, because it's been difficult for us to kind of get the more nuance of not just recognizing when somebody is really not listening and really not working with you, but also recognizing when they are. That can be tricky for people.
No, I think that was good. I think the other thing I would add that you could do training on, there's an in-between place between training on how to do outreach in different ways, like one-to-ones and house meetings is step one, and then Kamel mentioned how do you do trainings to prepare for negotiations or an action, and so forth. The other in-between step that we mentioned is we sometimes call research meetings or research action meetings, that once something has been brought up by a number of people as a problem and you're trying to investigate, is this something we want to work on and could turn into our issue, you may have actual meetings with. It could be people in the school department in the area that you're looking at. It could be people in other school systems, so forth. But we call them research meetings, where you're not actually asking someone to do something, but you're trying to find out how they see the problem, what they're doing about it, what they think should be done about it, who do they think knows more about it. And those are another type of meeting that you also could prepare a list of questions we want to ask for those meetings and even role play them so people feel confident going in. But those research meetings or research actions help you gather intelligence about the potential issues you might pick. So that's another in-between thing that happens in between the one-to-one and other kinds of forms of outreach, and then the actual preparation for actions and negotiations that Kamel mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And right now, as part of our focus on training, something new that we're trying to do is have, at the end of the summer, a large training that we're actually inviting especially youth groups from other organizations in town to come participate in. That's sort of a more comprehensive organizing training where we would talk about base building and outreach, and we would talk about issue development, strategy, power analysis. And what we're doing for that, since we're such a new organization and since I'm so new in some ways, is we're inviting people from the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, this organization been around, I think, for 20 years, something like that, to come in and help us with that training. So recognizing, especially through the work that, is going on with Annenberg and Nellie Mae, where might you be able to bring somebody in to do trainings with you, your staff, and your leaders?
Great. I want to thank both of you so much for taking the time this morning to just share all of your experience, your ideas, your thoughts, and thank people on the line for listening in and for asking questions. We're going to be posting the recording of the webinar once again up on our website, so you can share that around in your sites. Every site did have a representative on today, so please spread the word. We'll be sharing resources and things like that. When you log off of this webinar, you should get prompted for a quick feedback survey. Please do fill that out to help us plan these in the future, and give us any suggestions about the organizational logistics, topics, and other things that the questions are asking you about. But yeah, so thanks a lot, and we'll be following up with everybody as this project continues. I want to definitely